We're Topple Galloway.
I'm Steve Topple.
And I'm George Galloway. How do you solve a problem like Korea? Well, you could start by not regarding it as a problem, but as an opportunity to make amends for crimes in the past. But it would be churlish, wouldn't it, not to take our metaphorical hats off to big Donald Trump?
If I was wearing a hat today, then I think I might be doing that, George. Yes, it's a curious situation. We've seen on Twitter the Liberals going into a proverbial meltdown about Trump being able to break a cycle that no other US president has been able to break before. But I think it's a fascinating conundrum. I mean, you're the expert, if you like, on this area, the Korean Peninsula, the geopolitics, not really my sort of area. I know what I think of Trump, but so what's your hot take on the situation?
This problem was of General Eisenhower's making. That's how long ago we're talking. This war has lasted 65 years, therefore longer than I've been alive. Since the 100 Years' War in the Middle Ages, there's not been a war like this. Now, you may say that the big shooting finished in 1953, and that would be true, but the big shooting killed almost a quarter, almost 25% of the entire population.
Was it 2.5 or 3 million?
Yeah, and that's just the official number. When you factor in the 1 million Chinese soldiers who lost their lives, and the uncounted dead, the unknown soldiers, the unknown civilians, more likely. This is a war almost like no other. General Curtis LeMay, the chief of the US Air Force in the Korean War, boasted that they had not left a single village undestroyed. They dropped napalm, they dropped chemical weapons, they dropped more bombs than had been dropped in the entire Pacific theatre in the Second World War on people in sandals who were merely trying to reunite their country. And of course, the Cold War has never ended. Korea has been subject to the vicissitudes of the American opening to China, the rapprochement détente between America and the Soviet Union, between Sino-Soviet conflicts. That's why North Korea is like a hermit kingdom, isolated from the world and endlessly threatened. By the way, the point you made about the Liberals, I've just been looking back at the response to Richard Nixon's opening to China. When he recognized China, de-recognized Taiwan, and opened the door on the modern China. The very same liberals and the very same neocon fanatics were up in arms about Nixon's China opening and attacking Nixon in exactly the same ways. The liberals talking about how awful China was and how dare an American president take tea with them. The neocons, led by one Henry Scoop Jackson, who is only the iconic lodestar of the Henry Jackson Society, the rabble of neocons in Labour and the Tories in Britain today.
Indeed. I think that's crucial, actually, what you just said to understanding this is the historical context, isn't it? Because North Korea, as you say, has been presented and made out to be this pariah state, if you like. But when you look at the war and 2.5, 3 million conservative estimate people killed, a country and its people can't get over that kind of carnage and that war crimes on that scale very easily.
Especially, Steve, as it was preceded by the Japanese occupation of Korea, one of the most brutal, rapine occupations of any country, anywhere, at any time. So the pariah state is actually not North Korea, insofar as it has acted like a pariah, that's because people treated it like a pariah. But here's the point. Now, this challenges people like you, I think. I said when Donald Trump was elected that I was not happy Trump was the president of the United States, but I was very happy Hillary Clinton wasn't, because I believed, and I think that's now in part vindicated, that Trump had some very good instincts that if he were allowed to follow through on, could lead to tension reduction in the world. His pledge to pull out of Syria, his pledge to reset relations with Russia, were both things worth having that Hillary Clinton would never have done. And Clinton would never have been sitting there in Singapore yesterday with Kim Jong Un.
Indeed.
She'd have been bombing it. Trust me on that.
Yeah.
There have been wars raging all over the world now that are not actually raging. But there are, of course, dreadful black spots in America's foreign policy under Trump, in the Middle East in particular. So what do you think all this means? Does it mean that people can now say to Trump, well, jaw was better than war in Korea? How about trying it elsewhere?
Look, I think we had this conversation, didn't we, before we started filming today, and I agree with your assessment that Trump, while in no means perfect, and I'm under no illusions about the man, I think that I agree with you that he has been pushed by the deep state in America, which was always going to happen. Regardless of what you think of him, he's still presented as an anti-establishment candidate, and he still challenged the traditional Republican Democrat orthodoxy that these lines have been blurred for so many years. And I think he is being pressurised and squeezed by the deep state, and it's why we haven't seen his promises of pulling out of the Middle East, for example, yet totally come into fruition. But I would say as well, I'm not of the brigades led by certain Guardianistas who say the British people should show the biggest and most angry protest ever when Trump comes over here, because he's an elected leader, whatever you think of him. The US people elected him, and by opposing him so vehemently and not recognising when he maybe does do things which are in the interests of the world, you're undermining your own argument.
I think so, and the problem with the demonstration against Trump is that Trump is not the problem. American imperialism is the problem. Yeah. Barack Obama was worse. He might have been cooler. He might have been able to sing Sam Cooke, and he might have worn better suits and had a better hairstyle, but he killed a lot more people.
He did. He dropped more bombs as a president than any other sitting president in history. He was dropping bombs on the Middle East at the rate of 3 every hour in 2016.
Wow. I didn't know that number, but I mean, that doesn't surprise me. So I'll not be on the demonstration against Trump, partly because I find his liberal opponents actually more repugnant than him, especially the Hillary Clinton crowd, the people who fixate on the obvious vulgarity and brutalism of Trump, yet were billing and cooing over Barack Obama.
Absolutely, it's a rancid hypocrisy, isn't it?
Yeah, I really can't take that. But the more they attack him, the more his numbers go up. And what was looking like a wipeout for the Republican Party in the midterm elections is now looking like actually the possibility of a Republican victory. On current polling, he's only likely to lose 2 seats, which would retain more or less the control of the Senate and the House. So actually, I think Donald Trump in Singapore noodles, Singapore SLINGS, Singapore second term for Donald Trump. I think he just secured his second term.
And do you think then, moving forward, that this agreement between Trump and Kim Jong Un, do you think it's going to stand up, hold water?
I do, but in a way, it doesn't really matter because this is all show anyway. Lots of people have got nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan have got nuclear weapons. Israel's got hundreds of nuclear weapons. Iran has the capacity to build them. And after what happened yesterday, they'd be foolish not to. The reason the US is still threatening to attack Iran is because it doesn't have nuclear weapons. Yeah. They couldn't attack Korea because it does. So I think it'll stand up. It'll be made to look like it's standing up. And I don't think we'll see any more nuclear testing. And we'll see a lot of decommissioning of weapons in North Korea, but only if the bargain is adhered to on the other side. Trump's the author of The Art of the Deal. A deal means that there's something in it for both of you. A deal is not a zero-sum game, or it isn't a deal. So if the US pulls out its military forces from South Korea, if the natural process of healing and increasing unity between North and South Korea is allowed to develop in the way that 78% of South Koreans want. 78% of South Koreans have a positive view of Kim Jong Un. And let's not leave this part of the discussion without mentioning him. 34 years old, scarcely been out of his own country before, never been at a summit meeting before, never faced a barrage of hostile Western journalists. I think he played a blinder. He got the Yanks to the negotiating table. And of the two men, I thought he looked the more relaxed, the more confident performer.
Indeed, yes. Trump did as usual, very much playing up to the cameras, playing the big personality. But indeed, whatever you think of Kim Jong Un, an impressive performance. I think it remains to be seen whether this agreement is going to be a long-lasting feast of Singapore noodles, or whether the Americans and the Koreans will end up drunk on Singapore slings, quite frankly, George.
That would be a good ending, except I want to ask you a special question. What did you think of his hairstyle?
Who's, Trump's or Kim Jong Un?
Well, apparently they've exchanged hairdresser numbers.
Oh, okay. I won't be taking tips just yet. What a week it's going to be for Brexit this
and the Tories.
Week. Well, and the Tories as well, George. Yes, we have the fetid EU withdrawal bill finally coming back to Parliament after the House of Lords made infinite numbers of amendments, with the Brexiteers screaming, "We wanted to take back control, but not this kind of control." And Theresa May could fall if a vote in Parliament on Tuesday doesn't go her way. It's looking fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and the punctuation of that was the resignation of a Tory minister we'd never heard of from a position nobody knew that he held, which was hailed as a constitutional landmark by the liberal media, who are in full overdrive about trying to destroy Brexit.
Yes.
Now, I know we have some nuance of a difference on this, and further from your point about control. My point would be the British people had control, not the Parliament, not a House of Lords stuffed full of the putrefying corpses of the English aristocracy, flatmates, big party donors, and so on. That's an entirely illegitimate chamber. And so I'm against them having any control over a decision that was made by 17.5 million people to leave the European Union. So whilst I'm fully behind Jeremy Corbyn's attempts to make life as difficult as possible for the Conservatives, he has no duty. He's the leader of the opposition. The clue is in the name. He's got no duty to help them get their own measures through Parliament. They're not his measures. But at the end of the day, Labour will have to make a decision at the end of the day, not this day, but sometime soon. Do we want Brexit or don't we?
Indeed. I mean, as a journalist, if I thought the government couldn't keep up with what's going on with Brexit, I struggle to as well. But it's like you said, the way the media, mainstream media, portray Jeremy Corbyn's role in this, it's like he's leading Brexit negotiations, and his party are treating it like he's leading Brexit negotiations. You've had constant briefings by anti-Corbyn MPs against what's going on. You had Keir Starmer having to call an emergency meeting about the proposals for the European Economic Area yesterday to try and whip...
Was that what he did? I fell asleep in the first few stanzas, as I always do when Keir Starmer
I usually fall asleep after mentioning his first name. But,
Keir Starmer.
But yeah, he had to call this meeting to try and get the rebels on side, as it were. But it's not Corbyn leading these negotiations.
No, he made that point in Parliament very well. He said, look, it's not the opposition that are negotiating Brexit, but mind you, neither are the government.
Exactly. That PMQ's last week was marvellous, wasn't it?
It's like a big ship drifting to the rocks, isn't it?
It's very bizarre. I mean, you say we may sort of not completely agree on this. We kind of do. When it came to the referendum, I wrote a column months before it saying, wake me up when the damn thing's over, because either way, with the current political system as we have it in this country, if we stayed in the European Union, we would have been a bit shafted, because I completely disagree with the European Union. It's an extension of financial institutions like Goldman Sachs, and it's corrupt capitalist to its core. If we Brexited under the Conservatives, we would have been shafted as well.
The difference being, we can get rid of the Conservatives.
That is the main thing, yes. So if push did come to shove and someone had held a gun to my head and said, which way you're going to vote, I would have voted Brexit, because I completely disagree with the whole principle and what the EU was founded on. However,
it was Putin what done it, apparently.
Yes,
this Putin is a Mephistophelian genius.
He is, isn't he? Time travelling as well.
He's rigged the Brexit, he's rigged the Catalan uprising, he's rigged the American elections.
Absolutely.
Donald Trump is a Manchurian candidate president. I mean, can't we get him to rule the world, this Putin? He's pretty good.
He's ruling us already, really, isn't he, by a proxy? It's all preposterous, and as we're going to see, I believe, this week, the government's just going to fall more and more into chaos with it. However, do we think Theresa May will fall?
Well, depending on the voting over the next hours, she may very well fall. On the other hand, they may keep her as the least worst option, I know that's hard to believe, till the final bill comes back for its meaningful vote. She, 1 year ago, almost exactly, had a parliamentary majority and threw it all away. Don't forget, she could have continued for another 4 or 5 years, but she went for an early election thinking that she could stuff Corbyn, wipe out the Labour Party, and then Brexit would have been a breeze. She could have done any Brexit deal that she wanted. That must go down as the biggest political miscalculation in British politics.
I think so,
in a century or more.
Yeah, I think so, and I agree with your assessment. I don't think she'll go just yet. I think she's going to hang on by her rabid and decaying claws for a little bit longer. But I think all the while her position's undermined. I mean, there's been talk in the past few days as well, hasn't there, about David Davis taking control of Brexit negotiations completely, there's mutterings in the party of taking Theresa May completely out of the loop and giving the whole thing to David Davis.
How could they tell, you know, as Dorothy Parker said when told of the death of President Hoover, Calvin Coolidge, she said, how could they tell?
Exactly so, and I think how can you tell, and how we're going to spot the differences, this is going to rumble on for quite some time. I don't think there's going to be any resolution to this anytime soon. The
Brexit camp is in all kinds of trouble. Someone, somehow, got hold of a big cache of emails belonging to Mr. Aaron Banks, the bankroller of the Brexit campaign. Yes. Maybe by next week we'll have further and better particulars on that.
So, George, as well this week there's been quite a hoo-ha about the deselection of Labour MPs, specifically that a document has been released on a website called WikiHow explaining how to deselect a Labour MP. It came apparently from grassroots activists, including a member of Momentum, and it's a fun, tongue-in-cheek guide to getting rid of any Labour MPs we don't like. Of course, the implications are this plays into the divide that exists in the Labour Party between Corbyn's ilk and the moderate, Blairites, centrists, whatever you wish to call them, MPs, which I'm rather appropriately actually sitting in quite a regal chair that I imagine some of these moderate Blairite MPs sit in as part of the course in their drawing rooms at home.
Well, in fact, the upholstery in the House of Commons is terribly seductive.
Of course,
the carpet's deep and the prices cheap. So you can understand MPs don't want to lose their gig. I'm out of all this now, of course, not really my business. But what I can tell you, I was for nearly 20 years a Labour MP and nearly 10 years as an independent MP. I was challenged at every election in a reselection battle. And none of the moderates complained about it because it was the moderates that were challenging me. So the idea that an MP is a job for life, when even in the United States, both Democrats and Republicans have to face in every cycle, not just a reselection, but a full public primary vote where the members of the public can vote. Somehow that's acceptable in a democracy like the US, but Bolshevism if it is suggested here. My view is simple. Jeremy Corbyn will never be Prime Minister if his MPs remain the MPs that he's got now. They would literally break his legs on the way to the palace to get the seals of office. So more power to their elbow if they're going to force reselection. I think it's really not rocket science. Corbyn has at least 180, maybe more, MPs that really, really hate him. You can't function like that. The opposition sitting over there and the enemy sitting all around you. It doesn't work.
I completely agree, and I think that some of the comments that have been coming out from these moderate MPs is quite telling, if you like. There was one who spoke to Huffington Post and said that this pamphlet and the whole idea of deselection, reselection is a distraction, George, from beating the Tories, even though the biggest distraction Labour has at the moment is these rebel MPs briefing against Corbyn and trying to upset the apple cart with Labour's stance on Brexit. I mean, the sort of irony is unbelievable. But I agree with you that why should they have this season ticket on the Westminster gravy train, if you like, for the whole of their life, essentially? This kind of the reselection elements and these processes are commonplace in other parties in this country as well.
Well, Corbyn would be the Prime Minister now if not for these rebel MPs.
Absolutely.
It would have been him in Canada at the G7. It would be him running the country, changing its foreign policy, doing all the things he's promised to do. And he would have won the election if he hadn't faced 18 months of fifth column sabotage by his own side. So for me, it can't go on. If it goes on, he's done for.
No, it can't go on. I mean, it's like a scene out of Carry On Cleo almost, isn't it? Where you can imagine Corbyn as the Kenny Williams character going, infamy, infamy, they've all got it in for me. Of course, I may joke about the fact that it's turning into a carry-on movie, but there's a serious point to be made. And as you quite rightly allude to, who knows what 2017's general election result could have been if Corbyn wasn't constantly knifed in the back by his own MPs. And I think this poses a bigger question, which I know we've discussed privately before, the future of the Labour Party. If these Labour MPs don't toe the line, and if a process like mandatory reselection does not come in and these rebels maintain their stance of undermining Corbyn at every turn, do we see the Labour Party continuing in its current form, or do we think it will eventually fracture down the middle?
Well, funnily enough, I saw just the other day one of these moderates predict that a new centre party, they said, led by David Miliband, the Blairite prince over the water, would immediately shave 15% off Labour and 15% off the Tories, giving them a 30% share of the vote, with a £10 million war chest already. I personally think that will prove an irresistible lure to these people, because if they stay in the Labour Party, and if Corbyn wins the election, which he's the bookies' favourite to do, they're going to then have to break away, having dishonestly been re-elected as Labour MPs with Jeremy Corbyn as their leader. And that will be far more damaging to their reputations.
Absolutely. I think, again, as with always the case with Corbyn, this is going to run for quite some time as yet.
Going to run and run. Shall I tell you my highlight of the week? Speaking of carry-on films, I ended up with my entire family, luckily inside a locked car, with the sun visors down and my hat pulled over my head, forcing the children not to look, caught in a pincer movement between a naked bicycle ride with hundreds of naked people, all of them white, most of them men, who had been given permission by Mayor Sadiq Khan to have a naked cycle ride through the centre of London on a Saturday afternoon. Hundreds of shriveled, flaccid penises, or peni, swinging.
Is that the plural?
I don't know, I'm guessing. And just as I was turning my children's heads away from this awful sight, who is coming en masse in the opposite direction but a free Tommy Robinson march of knuckle-dragging fascists giving Hitler salutes? And they met. These two processions actually met. I don't know which one was more shocked and embarrassed. It was Free Willy meets Free Tommy. Now, this on the day of the Queen's official birthday, already a big security operation, and the Mayor of London somehow failed to ask the Home Secretary to ban the fascist march. Somehow, as a man of Pakistani Muslim heritage, sensed that there might just be some issue of public morals involved in allowing the laws on indecent exposure to be suspended for the day. If one man was naked behind a bike shed, he'd be arrested for indecent exposure. But hey, hundreds of men can cycle through London. And the fascist march got out of hand. The police at one point running away from fascists chasing them. It really was a very bad weekend for the Mayor of London. Meanwhile, of course, people are being murdered in record numbers. Stabbings, slashings, shootings, even machine gun shootings. The police would be entitled to be pretty angry at the Mayor, don't you think?
I think so. I think we come at this from slightly different angles. I'm no fan of the police, with my slightly anarchist tendencies. However, it has to be said that what was Sadiq Khan doing, allowing this to happen? Now, I'm all for free speech. If these people who support the mindless Tommy Robinson wish to air their dirty laundry in public, that is a fundamental right in our democracy, and that's up to them. However, terrible planning from Sadiq Khan, and it poses the bigger question about, as you say, what his priorities are for policing in the capital. Because we do have a crime epidemic just 100 yards from where I live. A young lad was murdered last year. Just last week, 50 yards from where I live, someone else was stabbed, a 17-year-old boy. And it does pose the question of even what is Sadiq Khan doing?
2 people were slashed in High Street, Kensington, yesterday.
I saw that.
A murder took place in Kensington and Chelsea the week before. This is no respecter of persons or territories. There's a murder epidemic in London, and the Mayor, when all this was happening, was standing in Oxford Street bemoaning the fact that it had not yet been pedestrianised. Now, I'm in favour of pedestrianising it, don't get me wrong, but the question of his priorities is now, I think, sharply raised. I'll tell you another thing he failed to do. Gordon Brown banned the Dutch fascist, Geert Wilders, the leader of the Dutch fascist formation, from entering this country. He said it was not conducive to the public good, as indeed it isn't. Wilders turned up to Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, fully expecting to be denied entry when he arrived at London. And he was waved through. So a Dutch fascist addressing a good couple of thousand British fascists, taking the Sieg Heil salute, and then running down the street, chasing the police. Police assault, all kinds of disorder. I know you're more a freedom of the speech man, but, you know, they don't have the right to cause and stir up racial and religious hatred. There are other laws against that, but that's what they were doing.
This is, yes, that is a very good point in itself. While I'm all for free speech, of course I'm not for free speech that is malicious or, as you say, inciting hatred or aggression. And if that had been the left, I've been on many sort of anarchist protests. If that had been the left,
you'd have been kettled.
I've seen disabled people thrown out of their wheelchairs by police on those protests. So if it had been the left, yeah, I think the response would have been quite different. And yet suddenly the far right are allowed to get away with it.
Yes, and I dare say the police are pretty unhappy with these EDL types, the English Defence League. There's a lot of foolish libertarianism around that is more focused on Tommy Robinson. That's not his real name, of course. It's a much longer double-barreled name, on his rights rather than the rights of the people that he's hunting. They're human beings too. And they're being hunted not for anything they've done, but for the colour of their skin and the faith that they possess.
And that is ultimately the point.
Which, alas, means that's the end, only for this week, of Topple Galloway. It's goodbye from me, George Galloway.
And it's goodbye from me, Steve Topple.
Just one more thing. I'm hopping mad about the naked bicycle ride. Not because I hate nudity. There's a place for nudity, even sex. But it has to be between consenting adults. They have to be consenting, and they have to be adults. Thousands of people were exposed, and I mean that literally, to hundreds of naked, mainly men, in the streets of London on Saturday. Do you know that they were allowed to cycle past Her Majesty the Queen's residence at Buckingham Palace? What was the mayor thinking about? And to have it on the same day that Geert Wilders, my director, who's also my wife and therefore cannot be denied, was allowed to come into Britain to stir up racial and religious hatred. Somebody has to answer for these.
Just one more thing about the whole hoo-ha over mandatory reselection or deselection. We've had the moderate, centrist, Blairites, whatever you wish to call them, Labour MPs coming out this week screaming blue murder at the possibility that their season tickets on the Westminster gravy train could be ripped up by Corbyn activists and they will have to depart at the station called Not Welcome Here. Well, for me, it's about damn time that they were. These people, firstly, do not represent what Corbyn's about. Secondly, they very rarely represent the communities they claim to represent. And thirdly, as we see in councils like Lambeth and Sheffield, where you have corporate Labour politicians railroading, bulldozing through democracy, it's not in the interests of the people either. Time is up for the moderates in the Labour Party, and not too soon either.